Jeff, and welcome to my garage. Tonight I'm going to show you how to put rear brake rotors and brake pads on a 2016 Honda Pilot. This is an elite model. Should be very similar to a Honda Odyssey and Honda Ridgeline. What prompted this was when you put the brakes on, we had an audible rumble. You could actually hear a rumble coming from the rear. At least I thought it was the rear. And it wasn't shaking the steering wheel, which told me it probably was not in the front. But you could hear a rumble. You could also feel it in the brake pedal, which kind of tells me it was in the rear. This Pilot has, can't find my pocket. This Pilot has almost 100,000 miles. The brake pads are pretty well worn. I think they were original. So it was time to do them anyway. So I'll walk you through the process. It's pretty easy. I'm actually re-recording this intro. In the original one, I was holding my phone and looking down at the phone, and you would have been looking up at my nostrils. So it wasn't ideal. So anyway, let's get into the video, and hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching. All right, so basically what you're going to need is a Phillips head screwdriver right here. This just holds the rotor in place. Flathead screwdriver, maybe to dig this little rubber thing out. This will transfer to the new rotor. You're going to need a 12mm socket right here, and you're going to need a 17mm socket right here. All right, first thing, let's get this Phillips head screw. Take that out. Pop this little rubber plug. There's no right way or wrong way to do this, just whatever it takes to get it out of there. And apparently I chose the wrong way. Okay, there's that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is take the caliper, the brake caliper, loose. What the caliper does, basically it squeezes the brake pads on the rotor, squeezes them. When you push the brake pedal, fluid is forced through this hose into this cylinder, and it pushes this piston against this, and that's what squeezes the brake pads against the brake rotor. That's what makes you stop. So these are the 12mm bolts. So once you have these bolts out, basically what's going to happen is your caliper, just work that out of there. It's going to come lay up here. So here's your brake pads. These are anti-rattle clips. This one just popped loose. Just keep your brake pads from rattling. So these just are like little springs that go in these holes. As you can see, there's the thickness of the pads that are coming off. This is the thickness of the pad going on. As you can see, there's a considerable difference. So these just slide out of this caliper bracket. These are caliper slides. You want to make sure these are moving freely, which these are. The brake pad kit will come with brake caliper slide grease. I'm not going to put those on because these are moving okay. It's also going to come with these stainless, not exactly sure what the exact technical term of those things are, but that's what the pads, there's a channel, and the pads have this little piece here that slides in this channel. That's where your brake pads go. Let's see if we can get this caliper bracket off. This is the 17mm. These will be hard to get loose. Once they're loose, they should come out by hand, unless you're in the Rust Belt, and may the force be with you. All right, so there's our caliper bracket. I'll lay that down here. Next, we are ready to remove our brake rotor. Now, when you grab this, it's not going to move. There's a couple of threaded holes here. You can thread in some bolts and push it off, or basically just grab a dead blow hammer and give it some love taps, or not. Okay. All right, I need a bigger hammer. All right, so if the small hammer doesn't work, you get a bigger one. So off comes the brake rotor. In comes the new brake rotor. Now, I have already cleaned this with brake cleaner. When you unbox these, this is going to have some oil on it. You want to wash that oil off. So you can go to the parts store. It's just simply called brake cleaner. You don't want to get it on your hands. It's pretty nasty stuff. You don't want to breathe it. Unless you're into, psychedelic stuff. So put your screw back in. That's going to hold your rotor in place. All right, so our rotor's on, right? Not too bad so far. And on this here, we want to pry these old pieces here off. They just snap off of there. Okay, and grab your new ones. These are simply going to pop in place. Simply, come on, simply. So they can really only go on one way. There's these two little tabs that fit down in this groove, and you just snap them down. Same on both sides. All right, so this part is threaded, so it's going to go on this way. This goes behind where these bolts go in. If you learn how to do this stuff yourself, you can save a ton of money, because brakes are not hard to do. But if you go have them done somewhere, they're going to charge you a lot of money. Labor is not cheap. And there's nothing wrong with paying somebody to do stuff if you can't do it. Also, if you take this, if you take your vehicle to have brakes done, sometimes they will tell you that you need to have your brake rotors turned or resurfaced. And what they do is they take this machine that will cut a new surface in the brake rotor, which is fine. It works for a while. But the problem with that, it makes your brake rotor thinner. And what happens usually is heat causes it to warp quicker. So you're going to end up at the same place that you're at right now, putting on rotors. So I just buy brake rotors and do it all at the same time. Now in this power stop brake kit, there's a squeaker tab. And what this does is basically warns you when your brake pads are getting too thin or at the point of replacement. So this just snaps on there. As your brake rotor or your brake pad material wears down, it contacts this little squeaker tab. That's when you hear the little, the annoying high-pitched squeal. All right, so work these pads into these little channels. This is a little bit of a trial and error. Sometimes it's easier to put the top part in and then do the bottom because you can see the bottom easier than you can the top. Push that little tab down. All right, so there's our back one. And here's our front one. Stable bottom. So these can be a little fidgety. Just gonna keep going until you get it in there. There we go. Now the next step, when you have worn brakes, your brake caliper piston is going to be too far out. This is not going to fit on here because you had thin pads, now you have thick pads. So what you have to do is push. Can you see this? You can't see that. All right, so your piston, you got to push your piston back in to the caliper so you can make room for the new pads that are thicker. So I think this tool I bought on Amazon, not expensive. You can use big pliers, whatever method you need to do to push this in there. These tools make it a little bit easier. Okay. See if I can move this camera back some. Uh-oh. All right, so what I'm going to do is push this piston back down into the brake caliper to make room for the new pads. It's a pretty simple process. You just get everything lined up, start turning this, and it's going to push the piston down in the caliper. I'm going to go take a peek at the reservoir to make sure I'm not pushing this, make it going to overflow. All right, we should be good. So what I was checking, as you push this piston in, it's going to push the fluid back all the way up front into the fluid reservoir under the hood. And what I was trying to make sure I wasn't going to overflow that and push fluid out into the engine bay. It is natural for the fluid level to drop as your brake pads wear. All right, so see, I've got the piston pushed back in, and there's one more thing that we have to do. So the brake caliper is going to sit right here, just like we took it off. Now I got to find the new anti-rattle pins. These are kind of a booger. Not real easy. So you can't really put these in with the caliper off because it makes the pads want to shoot out. So what I'm going to do is try to work these in like this. And that way it will push against the caliper and not push the pads out of the caliper bracket. So there's the top one. The bottom one is more difficult because I can't see. It's not really hard, it just takes some time. It's just fidgety work. Is that in? Uh-oh, nope. So there's holes. The brake pads have these little holes that these clips line up in. I'll show you on an old one in a second. Okay, so we've got the anti-rattle pins in. We've got our caliper bracket bolts tight. Let's get one of these bolts started. You just got to keep trying until you line it up. So these caliper slides, there's a little spot where that keeps this from rotating. You have to make sure that's not going to rotate. That way you can tighten the bolt properly. All right, so we got our clips in. These bolts are tight. And there you have it. So an important step, next step, before you start to drive, start the vehicle, push the brake pedal a few times. That's going to go ahead and get the fluid back here into the caliper, and you'll be ready to stop. So, okay, so the pads have these little holes, and that's where your anti-rattle clips go in.